think people are ready for a call to action. They want to move forward. They want to have honest leadership who cares about them, who thinks about them first, who isn't going down to Washington so that they can get a bunch of fancy steak dinners and have doors open for them and drive around in limousines and buy fancy suits, which you know you don't have to worry about with Bernie. Where do you get that suit, man? Right off the rack. That's not what they want. They want somebody who's going to fight for them. Somebody who's going to say, you know what, let's have a prescription drug plan that's written on behalf of the people of America instead on behalf of the prescription drug companies. Why don't we try something like that?
This was Obama back in 2006. Backing Sanders. He was a senator at this point, statewide, backing one Bernie Sanders. And the fact of the matter is what people haven't changed. They want people who would, as Obama said, fight for them. They want honest leadership. As Obama said, right here, talking about Bernie Sanders, none of that has changed. What has changed is the Obama in 2006, and maybe make an argument hasn't changed at all. But the rhetoric of this Obama and the Obama that ran in 2008 and the Obama now. Because the Obama now, as opposed to the hope and change Obama that screamed it into every mic he can get his hands on, we now have deaden your expectations at those fancy steak dinners that he was essentially lampooning here. We're talking about Sanders. For whatever reason, and it's not even for whatever reason, the reasons are pretty straightforward. Obama has started to take swipes at Sanders. An article has just come out in Politico that makes the point that Obama would get into the race if Bernie Sanders was running away with the nomination. Anybody but Sanders. Right here. If Bernie was running away with it, I think we would all have to say something, but I don't know if that's likely. Well, it's up at the top. Right here. Back when Sanders seemed like more of a threat than he does now, Obama said privately if Bernie was running away with the nomination, he would speak up to stop him. Think about that. Obama, for the most part, has stayed quiet in this race. The catch of the matter is, and unfortunately for Obama, it does seem like Sanders is surging in this race. He does have momentum. Warren has dropped to the third place. Biden doesn't look like he can carry the load. Obama didn't want Biden to run in the first place. And yeah, going back to the Biden can't carry the load thing, there are 20 people in the Democratic race up to this point. And you still have people jumping into the race. Nobody was clamoring for the ball, Patrick. Nobody was clamoring for Bloomberg, who jumps in as if he was going to save and hold back the night. Fact of the matter is, the reason that the Democratic Party is freaking out is because Sanders is, in fact, surging. The swipes that you've heard from Obama recently, telling people to chill out and taking swipes at essentially the left. Deaden your expectations! Hopelessness is the only thing you can hope for. Establishment is here forever. Stop wanting nice things. That doesn't help when you have 60% of the electorate that wants those nice things. Meaning between Sanders and Warren, the socialist, and the person who's pretending to be the socialist, you have a strong side of the Democratic Party, a preponderance of it, that says, we want these things. We want the party to be something fundamentally different than what the party currently is. And a president, honestly, that played the country for suckers, running on this notion of hope and change, understood, even back then, that what the public wanted was something fundamentally different than what the public was getting, and that the political edifice itself was entirely unhinged and unattached to what the public actually wanted. Hence, tailoring a very specific campaign of hope and change. I'm going to appeal to the things that you want, even though I'm not really going to articulate those things per se. I'm going to give you hope and change. And you can fill in whatever you think those two words mean in the context of the political space. And that's what I'm going to run with. Problem is, 2016 comes around and Trump wins. And if your name is Barack Obama, what do you think in that moment? You've ran 2 terms. And in those 2 terms, after those 2 terms, the person who's running after you is somewhat of a clone of you with various sprinklings around the sides. And that person loses. It makes it look as if something that you did within the context of those 2 terms didn't live up to the expectations of the individuals in the electorate, especially since 10, 20% of those people voted for you and then voted for Trump. What does that also mean in the context of somebody running like Sanders? It looks to you as a repudiation of your administration, which burns. Obama's issue here, I would argue, is on 2 points. One, a holding back the night for third-way Democrats, a hegemonic point of view that has been ensconced in the party for 40 years, but also a protection of his legacy, something that he cares about deeply. Obama is about to wade into the 2020 race. Potentially. I mean, he's already waded into the race. I would even argue the article itself is a trial balloon, making Obama's point of view clear before Obama really gets involved in a race to give his point of view. And as it stands, where it looks like Sanders is becoming stronger in the race, Biden is stable, if not weaker, I guess you would say stable. As those things have gotten to that point, meaning the guy who he finds utterly detestable in regards to this particular electorate because of what it means for not just the hegemonic viewpoint of the party that has been ruled by neoliberal third-way Democrats that have been working in corporate interests, but also an outright repudiation, meaning his presidency was a failure. He hates that guy. That guy is the one that's surging in the race. Obama is about to get into the 2020 race, and establishment Democrats are hoping, praying that he can hold back the night. I say bring it. And I don't mean that in this kind of bravado way. I mean this kind of as a clearly this has to happen way. You have a fight between neolibs, third ways, and people who are pushing more so for the proletariat in the race. Meaning trying to reinsert the Democratic Party back to what it was in the FDR days. You can call them the FDR or the New Dealer Democrats. It's a civil war. And I've said it was a Democratic civil war for the last 3 or 4 months because to me, this had to happen. If it had to happen, I can't cry that it does. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content and you find yourself coming back often, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support PayPal Patron. This is a Groundhog's Day. I've done this video once before. God, I hate doing videos twice. But apparently my voice sounded like Barry White or Batman, as somebody said it, which sounds cool for maybe 2 minutes, but not necessarily for 20 minutes. So let's be more succinct in this video. But I still want to make my point. My argument here is that this argument really is about class. Ultimately, it is talking about Obama, and it is talking about his standpoint of legacy and third-way Democrats. But the third-way Democrat issue is an issue of class. My argument is that you've only had one party in this country, 2 wings of the same party. They will fight over issues of identity, yes, but issues of economic interest, for the most part, gets pushed to the sidelines. You have a corporate capture of both political parties, and even a media space that for the most part, everybody that's on there are just millionaires. Meaning you have a focal point, a point of view that is espoused constantly, even though it's not necessarily told to you that it's being espoused, and other things are being pushed to the side. This is an issue in many respects of ruling class, especially within the context of a Democratic Party. The reason that this party is freaking out right now is because a section of that party has ruled it, and that is now being challenged. And that is being challenged on multiple fronts. This is a civil war within the context of the Democratic Party, and they are praying that since they, at this point, have not been able to entirely hold back the night, meaning Sanders, that Obama will potentially do their jobs for them. Take a look at this. I've shown this clip before, but this clip is important. It makes my point that much more clear.
Democratic Party inside some in the past, but right now the committee's doing a lot better in terms of its fires. We've seen that on the Republican side some in the past, but right now the Republican National Committee's doing a lot better in terms of its fundraising, in terms of its coordination. The DNC is unpopular with its own base. Half of the Democratic Party, or roughly half the Democratic Party, felt like the DNC was unfairly tipping the scales in the last presidential election, trying to get Hillary Clinton nominated, trying to hurt Bernie Sanders. So you start with that bad blood. And really, there's just been a clash between these two sides that has resumed. The hostilities that had been put aside at the Democratic Convention in 2016 resumed the minute that Donald Trump was elected. This huge battle for the soul of the Democratic Party between the Clinton-type folks and the Sanders folks. And Tom Perez is in the middle of that, and he's gotten very explicit instructions from President Clinton, as we write in the paperback extension of the original book. He's gotten instructions from Bill Clinton not to let the party go to the Bernie Sanders folks.
You may not know this, but that the DNC convention, and by the way, the hostilities were never put aside. They dragged Sanders out in a crate, threw eggs and tomatoes at him while they laughed as he sat in that crate in front of the DNC and cried. And we wept with him. You could see videos of Sanders supporters crying at the DNC while Hillary supporters laughed. Now, the catch here is Sanders left that with, you can make an argument, shifting the perspective of the party in a particular direction. And you find that right now, meaning all of the work that took place in 2016, creating that space, has been blown open in the 2020 race, with all of these other candidates who represent just establishment Democrats having to pretend, or at the very least give some voice to whether they agree or disagree with what Sanders is saying. Now, you can understand for a party that hates Sanders' guts and have been having anti-Sanders meetings and all of these articles talking about how do we stop Sanders, with MSNBC slurring him and smearing him, essentially the Democratic Party's propaganda outlet. And he's still there. Not just still there, the man had a heart attack and started to climb in the polls after the heart attack. They're freaking out. How do we stop Sanders? Those hostilities didn't go anywhere, nor were they put aside. In fact, you can make an argument that when Hillary Clinton lost, they were inflamed. They're freaking out. At the DNC convention, after the convention, let's say, the chair of the DNC in that race, Keith Ellison, was expected to win that. Obama was calling around to get people to get into the race to prevent Keith Ellison from taking that. This gentleman, who wrote the book Shattered, is making the point that Bill Clinton also was involved in telling Tom Perez, don't let Sanders and his people take the party. This is a wing of the party. It's not one individual per se. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Obama, all of those are the exact same people. They are Reaganite Democrats. In this very specific case, having the party for 40 years and control of that party for 40 years, they were able to get rid of the New Deal Democrats. These are the Roosevelt Democrats. These are the guys who believed in this notion of workers' rights, skeptical of Wall Street. Third Way Democrats ran an insurgent campaign, and in that insurgent campaign, essentially cannibalized the New Dealers. They got those guys out of the way. Up to this point, they have been able to rule that party. Bill Clinton made the Faustian bargain of taking a huge amount of cash and doing favors around the edges, meaning we can do incremental stuff, but that's the best that we can do. However, the left will stay with us. because they have nowhere else to go. You're terrified of the creatures and the monsters that are in that other party. Fair enough. We're the adults in the room. We know how to win, and you have nowhere else to go anyway. Now, this is the norm. I mean, this is the rule set that goes on for decades. But what happens? In Obama's term, Obama loses the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, 1,100 seats all throughout the United States. So let's say after Obama, during Clinton's run, the Democrats, House, Senate, Supreme Court, 1,100 seats all throughout the United States. That is an abject failure at a level that is breathtaking. And so the lefties, who were told they had nowhere else to go, pitch a bitch. And in doing so, this hegemonic norm that has been in place for all of these years, where it was unquestioned, any notion of a lefty was pushed to the side as a radical. It gets challenged. How could it not get challenged? It's an interregnum at that point. Clinton loses. There's no clear leadership. You have an established wing of the party, but for the most part, there's no leadership. And you have people challenging that leadership. And that builds from 2016, when Sanders was cheated and it was unfulfilled. Not just unfulfilled in 2016, it was also unfulfilled in 2008. And now you have 2020 with a true believer in the race. And they're freaked out by that true believer. Obama will get involved in this in order to protect his established wing of the party. But it's also intimately entwined with him protecting his legacy. Back in 2017, when it was asked or talked about the Warren running, Obama took that as a challenge to his legacy. The thought being that if Elizabeth Warren runs immediately after me, it would mean that what I did in regards to Wall Street and putting out stimulus was inadequate. Meaning, if you had a lot of Democrats that surround Warren and says, yes, we believe in this idea, it would be a challenge to my legacy. It would be an outright repudiation to my administration in those 4 years or 8 years. Doesn't matter what the public needs. Doesn't matter what's in the public best interest. Doesn't matter what the public even wants. The fact that the Democratic Party, for the most part, agrees with healthcare, agrees with expansion of Social Security. He was going to cut Social Security, agrees with not selling the country out in these trade deals. That TPP was going to give over sovereignty of the United States to a bunch of unaccountable courts in foreign countries. He sold us out. That's my point. He was willing to do that. And maybe the public is not on board for that. Even when the public said no, he was still running around trying to get that deal passed. Yes, I think he failed as a president, especially if this notion is hope and change. 95% of the jobs created under Obama went to the top, were low-wage jobs. 95% of the wealth created went to the top 1%. And this is a president that screamed hope and change. And he is worrying about somebody coming behind him that will be more verbose in what they want to do in regards to economic stimulus, or, dare I say, progressive ideals in regards to those politics. He's worried about that. That bothers him. Missing the fact that the public, his party, on whole, wants it. What do you think then? What do you think then for Sanders? If he feels that way about Warren running, meaning just the concept of Warren running in 2017, he was like, oh, that's a repudiation of my legacy. What does it mean when Sanders runs? And Sanders get, 46% of the vote tally? What does that mean? How does he feel if he felt that way with Warren? And beyond having that much of the vote tally, what does it mean when he runs in 2020? And you have a person who's running that is literally a repudiation of what it means for the Obama era. It burns. It burns. Right here. This is right here. The boldness over the next year, Obama, according to his closest advisors, will start to emerge with slightly bolder colors. The boldness might be riding in the battle, unfolding on his side if he did lead a potential Stop Bernie campaign. Stop Bernie campaign. That's awesome. And again, just to make the point that much more clear in regards to legacy, right here. If he feels this way about Warren, what do you think he feels about Sanders? As for Warren, the then candidate who tried to bridge the worlds of Sanders and Obama, Obama's relationship with Warren is famously complicated. Back in early 2015, when Warren was considering a run for president, it started to excite progressives. Obama said privately that if Democrats rallied around her as a nominee, it would be a repudiation of him, a sign that his economic decisions after the recession had seemed inadequate. What does it say then about Sanders? It has a burn in him. It has a burn in him that Sanders is doing this well. And right here, here's another one. He hasn't said that right here. When it comes to Sanders, I asked one of the advisors if Obama would really lay himself on the line to prevent Sanders as a nomination. It's the one at top. This one. So right here. Back when Sanders seemed like a more threat than he does now, Obama said privately that if Bernie were running away with the nomination, Obama would speak up to stop him. Asked about that. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal. Yes, it burns about his legacy. Yes, he wants to defend the third way. And he wants to prevent a hegemonic shift in the Democratic Party that I would argue, if the party is to remain viable, has to take place. Has to take place. Last point, Democratic Civil War. I've said this before, and I think I've said this for the last 3 months. The Democratic Party has to have a civil war. I don't say it because it's necessarily something I want, even though it is. I say it because logically it has to take place. You have people like Ilhan Omar, AOC, getting into the party saying, we have a list of policy things that we want to get accomplished. Social Security expansion, free education, Medicare for all, Green New Deal, all these things. We have clear policy ideas that we want, and tax increases. The Democrats who are currently there don't want those things. They're against those things. And so if these guys are going to get what they want, they have to take those other ones out, or they have to bend those to their will. Meaning just right off the basis, as the very basis of what they want, it runs in line or runs against what the other party or what the other parts of the Democratic Party want. It's a clash of ideals. It's a hegemonic shift that they want to take place that the current establishment does not. It had to be a democratic war. There was no choice but for it to be a democratic civil war in this case. And with Obama joining into this, to some degree it comes to a head. If Sanders can get through the door that he wants to get through, then it makes all the sense in the world that these guys will throw every body, every goblin, every dog, every whatever in the mix in order to stop you, us, we, from accomplishing the goals that we set for ourselves and getting through that door. Obama was going to join into this because ultimately Obama is working for a particular class. And that class deems him to do such, not to mention from a political sense and a legacy sense. He feels he needs to do such. This clip gets across that these guys are working in tandem with one another. Nancy Pelosi, all of these guys. And last point, do you honestly believe that any of these Democrats who are part of this particular establishment are hurt by Trump winning? They are not. They're not at all. My point is they would prefer Trump to win over Sanders. And they would even prefer Trump to win over Sanders in the sense that it will shut up the left for a generation. These are not friends of the party per se. They're friends of their particular class and their particular clique. It's not this thing where all of us are pushing for the same things. We have very different political objectives in mind. In fact of the matter is, Nancy Pelosi with her $100 million, Bloomberg with his, $50 billion, Steyer, none of these people are adversely affected by Trump losing. Be aware. I know they gesticulate and complain and everything else, but at the end of the day, from a policy position, you can make a case that from a class standpoint, they are better off with a Republican winning as opposed to Sanders. Obama throws his body in the race. Marcus will, but aren't Sanders and Obama good friends? That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. What does that matter? You have differences. Marcus, you and I can be buddies and we can have completely different political dispositions. That has nothing to do with anything. Ultimately, Obama, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, all of them represent a particular class. Rahm Emanuel, throw him in. Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has $100 million in the bank. You think she's affected in any way if Donald Trump wins? The answer is no. The point I'm trying to make to you is it doesn't matter if they're friends. It has nothing to do with these guys from a personal level. It has everything to do with the segment, perspective of the party that they represent. That party that they represent has been in power for 40 years. Ultimately, for the longest time, you've had two wings of the same party. And right now, one of those wings is trying to break away and to be something legit. Sanders is trying to drag this party back into his New Deal roots. What they know is that if he does, you're going to have all sorts of people jumping into the party doing just that. Meaning the perspective of the left widens. The more successful Sanders is, it widens. These guys hate you, meaning they hate the fact that you exist. If Sanders is a Democrat, what are they? If Sanders is a Democrat, what are they? My point is like they're Lib Dems or something. Ultimately, they have been able to assume the position that we are the left. This is as far left as you can go. And then Sanders comes in, and he's to the left. And he represents the real left from the standpoint of workers and the poor and etc. They hate that. The very fact that they exist called into question as to what they are. And as Obama makes the point that Warren running, and I would imagine definitely Sanders running, is an outright repudiation of his position. It's also an outright repudiation of his worldview in regards to political space, but not just his, all of theirs. They hate their guts. The last thing they want to see is Sanders have a proliferation of people who think like him, who pull the party to the left. In the same way that they were able to take over from New Deal Democrats, they are infinitely aware that the same thing could happen to them. And they are fighting for their political lives. That's my perspective of it. All right, I'm going to end this because this went the last one. I've done this video twice. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all.